Hello and welcome to the Romance Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Martin, and tonight we are talking about paranormal historical romance. But before we dive into all those details, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Leverett. I write paranormal romance and I write contemporary fairy fantasy. So for my paranormal romance, it's set in the 12th century and follows the life of Marie de France, who is an actual 12th century nun who wrote stories about magic and knights and ladies, and I sort of adapt them into modern day-ish romances.
Cool. Okay, very well. Liv.
Hi, I'm Liv, and I write paranormal and historical romance, and sometimes both paranormal and historical at the same time.
Okay, Jeannie.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Adams. I write paranormal romantic suspense, urban fantasy, space adventure with my friend Nancy Northcott, and periodically I do write historical paranormals.
Very good. Arian. Arian?
Oh, sorry. I'm not used to it. Apologies. Hi, Arian Williams. I think I, at the moment, write exclusively MM Paranormal, but all my characters seem to time travel, so there's always historical something in it.
Sounds good. Donna.
Hi, I'm Donna MacMeans. I write, I write paranormal historical. That's primarily invisible people. They turn invisible, moonlight. Can't help it, just happens. I do straight historical. I do some paranormal. I do time travel. I do contemporary, most recently contemporary gargoyles. So just do a lot of stuff, however the mood hits me. But I like it.
Anna.
I'm Anna Kensing, and I write paranormal, historical, queer romance, and contemporary romance as well. And my paranormal, historical, queer romance has tentacles.
Very good. And I'm Gail Martin and Morgan Brice. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. I'm currently working on a paranormal historical, first in a new series that is set in the 1890s. And it's a lot like the old TV show Wild Wild West if Jim and Artie were together. Shocker. Many people already thought they were. And then I've got an epic fantasy set in a medievalish time period under the Gail name that will be getting several spin-off books under the Morgan name for some with male romance for characters that are secondary characters in the first series, but will have their own mini series after that. So several different time periods to juggle, which leads me to the first question. What leads you to the time periods that you choose to write about and set your books, and what attracts you? Emily?
My PhD is in medieval English literature, and I teach medieval English literature. And so I figured out that I wanted to write medieval romance, and I could make my students read the books they were based on. And so I, multitask teaching and writing. And I love the period. I love Marie de France herself. She's so interesting. We don't know too much about her. She wrote in French, but lived in England, which is why she's considered an English author. Her stories are really, really unique. They're like Arthurian romance, although almost none of them actually have any Arthur characters in them. They're just different knights and ladies. And I thought it would be so great to treat her as a character who actually experiences the sort of romances that she writes. So she is a main character, and then the other main character, Blaise, is a knight who turns into a wolf 3 days a week. And it's based on her medieval story, Biscleret, and he is the first sentient werewolf in English. That is the first werewolf that doesn't lose his mind when he turns into an animal. So I get to loosely base my stories on her stories, and that's a lot of fun to do.
3 days a week? That's a lot of dog fur.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. And it makes writing it difficult because I have to count. Would he be a wolf today? Would he not be a wolf? It has nothing to do with the moon, which is kind of interesting.
I'm terrible at that. If it were up to me, there would be a full moon like every day of the week.
Right. Whenever I need it to be, it just happens.
Yeah, my husband has to go back and go, no, you've already had 2 full moons this month. You have to give up one of them. Liv.
I'm laughing because that sounds like writing Vampire Time. Like, what? Wait, is it night? Okay, it's night. We've had anyway.
I do that.
The question was, what draws you to a specific time period? And my answer is, it's honestly, it's the whatever the story inspiration is, sort of dictates the time period. Like my book Lost and Found is not paranormal, but it's historical, set in 1920 Paris, and I wrote it because I had came across a essay or something about the French dancer. Anyway, he was in Paris at the turn of the century, and that sort of dictated the time and the place for my book. And so it kind of works like that. I wanted to do Victorian, and that, so I explored the Victorian time period. But it's not necessarily the time period itself, it's what I'm inspired to write the story that then sort of chooses the time period it wants to happen.
Okay. Jeannie?
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I'm right there with you, Liv. Well, the couple that I've written, one was World War II, which I'm very interested in, keen interest in it. My husband is a very keen World War II historian, and my father served. My father-in-law served. So, you know, having that sort of history kind of trickle into your consciousness all through your childhood, it was one that I sort of thought, well, you know what, I'm going to set a story there. And then the other one was actually a dare. A friend of mine said, so I have a Haven Harbor Witches series, which is my contemporary paranormal series, although it has some hearkening back and forth to historical periods. She said, hey, you should write the beginning of the town in the golden age of piracy in 1710. I lost 6 months going down the rabbit hole, learning about the golden age of piracy and clothing in 1710. So yeah.
As one does.
As one does. Yes, indeed.
How about you, Arian?
Well, I'm actually in Liv's camp where the character kind of inspires me, but there are periods that I will avoid. Unfortunately, Emily, one of which are medieval, but but lately the new Sanyang series I've been writing, I've been exploring my own cultural background and history. So went down the rabbit hole with travel back in time and all types of periods in my Korean history, which, my gosh, there's so many, and I have to read both in English and Korean. So it's been really, really interesting, and add in all the folklore and goes crazy.
Yeah. Oh, I bet that's incredibly fun, though.
Yes, except I don't have hours in the day to do it.
Very, very cool. Donna?
Well, I kind of hit the Victorian time period by accident. I originally used to write romantic suspense, and a friend of mine, Lori Foster, sponsored a contest, and her contest would you send in some pages that had a lot of sexual tension, and if you won her weekly contest as an unpublished author, if you won her opinion as the best story, she sent it on to her editor, Kate Duffy. Kate had a reputation of purchasing the stories that won, and she said, and right now everybody's sending in contemporary, so historical. If you write historical, you should try this. It's a great contest, lots of opportunity. So I thought I'd give it a try, and of course I'd write it historicals because I need every opportunity, every good vibe that I could get. And my idea for these pages with a lot of sexual tension in it was a striptease, a forced striptease, where the woman was removing her clothes to get something from the hero. And what kind of got me there was there was a scene in, what's the name of the Western movie where she is a school teacher and walks into a house and the outlaw's there and tells her to strip, and it turns out they're married and it's just they're playing. And I wanted to do something similar. And so in order to place this right, I had to have a lot of clothes. or it would be a really short story, you know, because we don't wear a lot of clothes. So I did some research, and it seemed like the Victorian time period not only had a tremendous amount of clothing that those women wore, but a lot of the morals, the whole society was very restrictive, what you could do, added a lot of conflict into the story. So I ended up writing that story. I missed every deadline for the contest, never entered the contest, but that story did win the Golden Heart back in 2006. Well, once that happened, my editor and my agent saying, you've got to write a sequel, which kept me in the Victorian time period, one book to the next, plus I had all that research. You know, you can't waste it. You go down a rabbit hole, you got to use it. So much so that when I was first trying to sell The Education of Mrs. Brimley and getting rejected by everybody and their dog, I decided, well, I'll write another story. My very first publishing credit was with Paranormal. I love Paranormal. I'll write a paranormal story, but I'll put it in the Victorian time period so I can use all that research and it wouldn't be wasted. And that's how I came up with my story about the woman who turns invisible with moonlight. Love that story. I loved it.
It's a great story.
It really is. It really is. I've got a contemporary version that's in Jeanne's The Witches Harbor.
Haven Harbor Witches, yeah.
The Haven Harbor anthology. I've had a lot of fun with that. Eventually I'll get back to it as soon as I can get cut loose from doing the straight historicals. But
Sounds cool. Sounds cool.
Yeah,
Sounds cool.
yeah.
Cool.
And it's just things fell correctly, and I loved the period, and tons of research books behind me. It worked out.
Yeah, very nice. Anna.
So I read a lot of paranormal historical. I read a lot of historical. I read a lot of paranormal, and I particularly love paranormal historical romance. And so when I was writing this series, I was going to set it. I was trying to decide where to set it. I needed a port town because a lot of it takes place on a ship, and it involves half octopus shifters. And so I was thinking about setting it in Annapolis, and then I went for a writing retreat in Port Townsend, Washington, and that is where I ended up setting it. I'm very much a sense of place writer. I write about places that I am in, that I visit, that I live in, that I live near, that I go to, that I stumble across. And because I happened to be in Port Townsend, Washington, which was a major Victorian seaport in the mid to late 1800s. And there's just a lot of, it had a depression in the late 1800s, around the late 1890s. And so the town sort of died. It was initially, it was the key city. The nickname is Key City because it had a customs port, and it was like the way of getting into Puget Sound from the east. And so it had the custom house, and it developed it was a huge boom town for a while. And then it sunk pretty precipitously. And so the town was abandoned rather significantly. And so a lot of the buildings were just left the way that they were. And then people came back in the 1970s and bought up the old Victorian mansions and renovated them. And so there's a lot of history still in the town, a lot of buildings that are still there, a lot of buildings that have been renovated. And so being in the town is a lot like kind of going back into the past. And so when I went on this writing retreat, I was sort of in the beginning stages of the book, and I was like, this is the place where I'm going to set it. And so I dug deep into the history of the town and the area, and I didn't do the Age of Sail, this is later than the Age of Sail. I do have a lot of ship stuff, and one of the characters is a smuggler, and does a lot of Pacific crossing voyages, but I'm a little bit too late for the golden age of sail. But it just really was sort of fortuitous, I guess, that I ended up stumbling across this particular town and this rich history that gave me a lot to work with.
Very cool. Well, For the upcoming books that tie into the Assassins series that will be male romance, that are set in kind of a medieval setting, I didn't do a PhD in medieval history, but that was my undergraduate history concentration. So I've loved it and studied it for a long time, and I've done 4 other epic fantasy series, lots of research. So this time decided to let's carry this over and make something much more romantic. And I'd already written the 2 pairs of gay lovers into the main story. So let's give them their own story and see where they came from. So I'm looking forward to writing that. The Victorian setting, 1898 Peacemaker with the brand new series, is also tying into the steampunk series that my husband and I write, Iron and Blood and Storm and Fury. And some of those characters, of course, will show up, probably all of them if I know me. And it's set in the 1890s with the Victorians as they never were but should have been. So lots of cool inventions. You know, they came up with a whole bunch of things they patented that never came to be. So in my world, they do. And
as a fan of, huge former fan of Wild Wild West, I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah.
yes, well, I'm describing, they've got a train car too. So, you know, it's going to be fun. And I think that's, I had studied those 2 periods so much out of everything. That's probably why I landed there, because I also wanted them to tie into the existing series, just so people have a bigger world to explore. Now, with all the research and everything, where are you a stickler for historical accuracy, and where are you willing to take, you know, to bend the rules, bend the details, take some authorial license? I mean, I saw a huge argument about this on Facebook over historical accuracy, and then somebody said, it has vampires. Why the details about what sort of buttons they're wearing or whatever the trivial thing was that it said it on? That's got vampires. That it sort of slipped their mind as they were arguing the nitpicks. So where do you sweat the details and where do you bend things a little bit? Emily?
Well, this is an interesting one because I had a fight with my editor over it. Because it's set in the 12th century, so there's not technology. I gave my character matches, and she was like, "That's a 20th century invention." And I was like, "Oh crap! All right, guess the moon's out." Leave behind the candles. No, it's fine. But actually, where we had our spat was over lingerie and underwear, because they didn't have fancy underpants in the 12th century. And that's actually the name of an academic paper I gave, because I talk in academics about the connection between my fiction and my being a medievalist and that sort of stuff. And finally, a bit like there are vampires in it, I'm like, but she's in fairy. Fairies can have fancy underwear. Okay?
Wait, that's the title of your dissertation? Fairies can have
even
fancy
medieval
underwear?
fairies can have fancy magic underwear. And
Prove
so
me wrong.
eventually we compromised and landed on a slightly fancy, but magic things put it on for you so you don't have to figure out how to do up your own laces kind of thing. And I lean more towards paranormal than I lean towards historical. And it's especially, I think, a little easier for me because I'm basing them on completely fictional stories this woman wrote, right? So, we know that she was an abbess. I'm pretending that she's Henry the Second's, not Henry the Eighth, Henry the Second's bastard sister, because she might be. That might be who she is. That's one of the possibilities. Which has how when her marriage fell apart, she ended up as a nun rather than, on the street. And that's based on one of her stories as well, about a woman who gives up her husband because he's fallen in love with somebody else. And at the end of the story, they all become nuns and monks together because they're good people. In mine, they don't do that. They her sister marries the man that she was married to and was in love with, and so she ends up in a nunnery and is not quite happy about it. And she has a magical familiar ferret too, named Asta, which is named after the Thin Man series dog, because I always love those. So I'm far more flexible on what I will do with history. But what I find so interesting about oh my God, there are vampires in it, so why are you fighting about this, is that it's become increasingly important to have that conversation, because so much of what we're seeing is, well, but there weren't Black people in the Middle Ages, right? That's not accurate. That's not true. There were. And
There
so
were gay people too.
yeah. And like there were bishops who were African. What color do you think they were? You know, and so there comes a point where like the accuracy conversation is being co-opted in really, really awful ways. So we have to have those conversations. And like, it's frightening when, you know, vampires are fine, but people of color are not. Like, you know, so I tend to be in a, but come on, it's sexy lingerie in a romance. Can't we just pretend that they had that in the Middle Ages? On one hand, and on the other hand, you know, there were actually people of color there, right? So it's a complicated and difficult issue to deal with, right?
We've had whole panels at DragonCon on how to find the gay people in medieval literature
Yeah,
and historic literature.
There's a romance called The Romance of Silence. That's the character's name, Silence. And it's a trans romance. It's about a girl who was raised as a boy so that she could inherit, and essentially is a boy. Like, it's a really, I mean, like, they exist all over the place. Just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean they don't exist.
Yeah, just because you didn't cover it in your required single high school history class that was an overview of 1100 years in one semester does not mean that they weren't there.
Right.
Yes, this conversation happens all the time. Liv, how about you?
My goal really is to try and avoid annoying readers. Like, I want to have enough historical accuracy that I don't like bump people out of the story. But you know, vampires, dude. It one series I have is set in 1806 New Orleans, and it's challenging to write because of the whole race dynamic, but it's hard to be romantic about a lot of the stuff that went on back in those days in that place. And one character is a vampire and another is a werewolf, and so that takes some of that sort of more awkward edges off. But really, my goal is to get enough of a grasp of whatever time period I'm working in, so that that readers can sort of fall into it with me, and I'm not annoying them.
That is a good goal. How about you, Jeannie?
Well, for me, with the World War II, there are so many people who are either World War II buffs or think they are, that the biggest thing that I nitpick is dates, as I make sure my timeline is right. So I originally set up the story that's set in World War II. The first one is called Behind Enemy Lines, and I originally had the characters, the bad guys, the Nazis, going after Bertie, the second heir there, and it was set before it's in 1339, I think, before abdication. And so first I had to deal with that part, and then I had to deal with the fact that he was actually in Paris. I was like, oh crap, I needed him to be in England. And so then I had to make sure that if I was going to be, and I do use Hitler, that if where he was actually on the dates that I'm having him at this, this cabin in the woods, or this, chalet in the woods meeting with his advisors, I needed to make sure he wasn't actually giving a speech in Berlin at that point. So I had to do a lot of timelining and date adjusting to make sure, because I was actually dealing with more modern history that's a little less subject to wiggly room. And there are very accurate, well-kept records about where people, especially heads of state, were on specific days, on specific times. But and doing the research for the whole 1710 one, the thing I focused on there was accuracy about the clothing, because one of the things, and Donna will second this, I'm sure, and probably Anna too, is the people who read that time period, they read, the early 1800s, the Regency period, the Victorian period, they love the whole clothing thing.
Mhm.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And they're such sticklers for, oh, no, buttons were not invented until X date, and you can't use, this until that, or button hooks weren't, I have found that one, button hooks weren't invented until such and such a date. And I'm like, they're vampires, people. Can we have button hooks, please? But that was actually challenging just because of, if you're going to do something in the golden age of piracy, and again, you have to figure out where people were. If the real Dread Pirate Roberts was in Jamaica, then you kind of have to have the real Dread Pirate Roberts in Jamaica. So, and I'm just making that up, but that to me has probably been the biggest nitpick: clothing and timeline, just to make sure that I'm not really making the people who are crazy about that sort of thing crazy. Just like Liv said, I don't want to pull people out of the story. So, yeah.
Very true. Arian.
Yeah, I think I'm in everyone's camp. I do try to do research, but I don't like to nitpick. When my historical story concerns more the Western, like I have a story set in somewhat late 1800s, and I wanted to make sure that time periods were correct because more people know about that. I fudged kind of like my character was a model for a really famous painting, and to make sure that famous painting didn't actually have known model for it, for example. But I'm recently more writing about the Korean history because that's sort of what I'm trying to expose readers to, and all the food and the way things worked in 15th century Korea, for example. And I'd like to get the accuracy correctly there because I want to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting and not fudging because most people don't know about it. So, like, for example, my editor said, Korea couldn't possibly have, heated floors in 15th century. I'm like, oh no, I did a research. It does exist. So those kind of things I want to make sure to like highlight so that I'm not lying about, the cultural stuff, which could pass without a problem, but it would be kind of sad for me. So anyway.
I don't know, with all the new Netflix and Vicky and IQIYI watchers of all the Korean dramas, you might find that more people are going, wait, that's late Josie and not Josie.
but some of those dramas actually are fudged. So believe it or not, like the period clothing are a bit fudged, and some of the other things that they do talk about it are, oh, this is fantasy, so we can kind of insert something else, like the vampires. Right? So I try my best. Anyway.
Okay, that sounds terrific. Donna?
Well, I'm probably a really laid back author. I do try to get all my facts straight. And the way that I do that is when I'm choosing clothing, I choose it from catalogs that existed at the time and the actual dresses. I figure I can't go wrong there. But my experience is that most readers, when they're reading, they get caught up and they miss the details that we sweat over, and worry over, and they're just going along with the flow. I once did a survey when we had our Romance Bandits blog, Jeanne will remember, and I asked readers for their favorite openers, their first lines from books that they loved. And people gave me their first lines, but they were all wrong. I had to research the books to find out what the real first lines were. And they might have had the gist of it, and they may have had a couple words, but for the most part, they didn't recall them. And I figured if they could forget something that made such an impression on them as being a favored first line, then they're not going to really get all worked up over some small little detail. My stories are very heavily concentrated on the hero and heroine. I try to keep it in the period because it is so sexy, trying to work in the love scenes with what you have to work with, and how to make it work. I love that. But I don't lose any sleep over it. And I figure more and more people are turning to Netflix and the streaming channels for their stories and for their entertainment. And I am of the belief that those screenwriters, they do whatever they can to make the story good and screw the details, the accuracy. So I'll give them a good starting place. And then they can take it from there.
Well, there's a running joke about how authors will spend 15 hours researching this obscure detail that translates to one sentence
Yes.
that you noticed, but it's right.
Nancy, Nancy.
Oh yeah, Nancy.
We tease our friend Nancy Northcott a lot about that because she worries about the color of the epaulets on the Waterloo soldiers.
And truly obsesses over it. But there aren't people alive during the Victorian period, for the most part, that are going to tell you that this is wrong. You know, a lot of it is just the culture has informed the readers that this is the way it works, but that's not necessarily true. So you just make it work.
So I don't know, perhaps Nancy and I are kindred spirits, because I too am one of those that obsesses over the research. Like, I write because I research, right? Like, some people, you know, like research so that they can write. I write so that I can research. Like, the research is the thing that I love the most about the writing. If the writing would take care of itself, that'd be great. Like, if I could just do the research and then the writing would like write itself, that'd be awesome. So one of the ways that I do a lot of research, and I am the one who spends 15 hours on a detail that will not even be one sentence. It'll only be a clause, right? It'll only be like one section of a comment. It'll be the color of something or the description of something, right? That's me. And my wife is usually the one who's like, sweetie, you have octopus shifters in your story. Maybe it doesn't matter what color the epaulets were supposed to have been then. So, but the thing is that, like, I actually, because I include the paranormal in the historical, like, I'm kind of I believe that this world should be complete except for the one thing, and the one thing is the paranormal thing, right? So all of my other historical stuff, I would like to be accurate. I want this to be exactly the world that it was at the time, except that there's octopus shifters in it. And that's the one thing that I have to explain away, right? I don't want to have to also explain away that I got that they got underwear, that they wore underwear, they didn't wear underwear, that the epaulets were this color versus that color. But in the end of the day, the last way that I sort of salvage this is my author note. And my author note is the opportunity to say, so I know that octopuses have 8 arms and no tentacles, but I wrote my entire octopus shifter story, including all of the love scenes, using the word tentacle, because come on, guys, like, octopus arms, not sexy. Tentacles, not sexy. I know that I shifted the dates of the events that happened in this book by 2 years because I needed them to happen in conjunction with something else. So the author's note is sort of where I explain to my readers where I take the artistic license. And I also do, like I say, this happened, this did exist, this was here, this was there, these shipbuilders existed, but they didn't build this type of ship, they built that type of ship. So I do a lot of that in my author's notes, and I feel like, you know, it doesn't really solve the problem of the reader kind of going through and be like, as they're in the story, like, oh, I don't know, Ms. Kensing, like, that did not happen in 1888, it happened in 1889, to be specific, on June 14th. And by the time, hopefully they get to the author's note where I say, I know this happened on June 14th, 1889, I pushed it forward to 1888 in May because I needed it to be in conjunction with the full moon on this date and blah, 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 blah. So that's how I deal with it.
That's
always
one of the awesome things about the Middle Ages is we're like, sometime in the century. You know? So,
Yes. Well, you know, I fudge in a couple of different ways with the steampunk books, because it's steampunk and not real Victorian. I can have some, crazy inventors who are coming up with this technology that nobody had, but it solves problems. And how do they have it? Well, wonderkin inventors, and magic. Magic can solve a lot of things. In the epic fantasy series, because it's not set in our world, it's not like Germany in 1450. It's not a specific place. It's not even in our world. I can be medieval-esque. And again, magic, it's effing magic. How does it work? It's effing magic. But also I'll look at our world for inspiration, and okay, maybe Germany didn't have a certain thing at a certain time, but China did. Okay, if it's in the same century and somebody thought of it, bingo. It's legit possible to be in a medieval story set roughly in that time, not even on our world. So where I run into trouble is you get the people who have watched an awful lot of movies, never took any history or read any history, and want to fight you on this never happened, that never happened, and it's like, no, seriously, honestly, put down the DVDs, pick up a book, you'll see this actually was possible, did happen, so
I have a fight in the fourth book of my series that's it's not out yet, but it's a fight that is basically led by and entirely comprised of priests that got angry and went to battle. Like, it's just a bunch of priests that do it, and that's a real thing that happened. And it's one of those where I'm like, people are gonna be like, that's ridiculous, except that it's not. Like, actually,
There were fighting amongst themselves. No, I believe that entirely.
Yeah, and like, there are a certain number of priests who probably became priests because they lived too long to keep fighting. Like, I think I've survived. I'm gonna put the sword down and I'm gonna go do, which is why I think you end up with like stories like Beowulf and manuscripts that also have religious stuff in it. Like, you can't tell me that there aren't priests and pastors out there that don't love Marvel movies, right? Mm-hmm. So like, sermon, Marvel movie, recipe for the pain in your knee, sermon, like, it's just how they work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, folks, as usual, we have blown through our time. I think we have to come back to this because there's a whole lot of unexplored territory. But before we wrap things up, let's let everybody tell people where they can find you online. And if you have a new, recent, or upcoming book, tell us about it. Emily?
You can find me at emilylavinleverett.com. I am blessed with a very unique name. So if you just remember my last name, you can find me without much digging, which always makes it interesting when I tell students I write romance and they come in and they're like, I found your book. And I'm like, oh God, no. But so you can find me there. You can find actually both the fiction that I write, and if you are interested in scholarship about medieval stuff or about Terry Pratchett or about Neil Gaiman, I've done stuff on all of that. You can find that on my website too. My two series are the Icefad Chronicles, which is about a human woman who goes to fairy to find out she's half fairy and find her fairy father. And then The Wolf and the Nun, which is the paranormal romance based on Marie de France. And I will be at MarsCon in January, BrettCon in March, Saga in March, and for the first time, NorwestCon in April in Washington. So I'm very excited about that.
Very good. Liv?
The husband just walked in with cookies and I was distracted from them. I can be found on liverancourt.com and most social media with some variation of live and Rancourt, live.rancourt, live-rancourt, whatever. Except TikTok, because I'm old. My next release will be Victorian Gothic MM romance called The Lighthouse Keeper. And I'm really excited about it. It's set in, it was supposed to be in San Francisco, but accidentally a lot of it happens right outside Seattle at a lighthouse that is out in Puget Sound. And it's been a lot of fun to work on, and I am really excited to have it out in the wild soon.
Nice. Jeannie?
You can find me at jeannieadams.com. You can find me on most social media under Jeannie Adams, but there are several of us, so look for the look for the romance author. Except for Instagram, where you can find me at JPA Griffin. And then you can find me here on Continual a whole lot. And my next release will be a Haven Harbor Witches story, connected to my Haven Harbor Witches story, and will be in the Valentine's at Canham Castle anthology that's coming out at Valentine's.
How about you, Arian?
Well, my name is very common. Way to pick an author name. So it's essentially everything with arianwilliamsauthor.com. You can find all the links there. I'm not on TikTok just because there's just too many social media. My next book should be the third one in the series, set in Korea. I don't know if it will have time traveling, but it might. And let me see. What was the other question?
Oh, if you had any, where to find you online, and if you had any books coming out.
Hopefully I will come back here as well. Finger
Yes.
crossed.
Donna.
Well, my name is Donna MacMeans, MacMeans. Actually, I tell people, I have this. This is, hopefully it will be the next book, but you can kind of see the cover. Does that show up? Anyway, I tell people my last name is, you think of a mean person, put a Big Mac in front of it, make a plural, and you got it. So, so that's me. DonnaMacMeans.com website. I'm on Facebook. I don't do all the other social medias. There's just too many coming out, and I can't keep up, and I'd rather spend the time doing other things. Let's see. I'm currently working on trying to finish the series that is driving me crazy called Rake Patrol.
It's so good, though. You have to finish it, Donna.
Lord, the last book I did, I love it. It was called How to Bait a Dangerous Rake. And I love the story. My agent has it, and I don't think she wants the other books that follow. There's 2 more to finish out the series, and she wants to see those before, because I am so slow. She wants to see those before she markets these 3. It's going to be kind of hard because Berkeley has already published the first 2. I just got the rights reverted back to me, so we're hoping to send all 5 of them. But the one I'm working on is tentatively called A Rake in Sheep's Clothing. And I need to talk to you, Jeannie, about the Shetland Islands, because that's where it's being set. And then I'm also working on a story for the Midsummer Night Cayman Castle anthology. So it should be fun with 2 books coming out this year.
Mm-hmm.
But mine's with fairies. So so that should be fun. And
Okay.
keeps me busy. Hey, and congratulations, Gail, because you're going to be at Dragon Con as a guest.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll be coming. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very cool. Very cool.
Anna.
You can find me at annakensing.com. I am on most of the social media sites. I am actually on TikTok, Anna Kensing Books. And I have a book coming out on Tuesday, January 10th, although it is not paranormal historical romance, because I do also write contemporary. And so this is contemporary, and it's super dirty. But it's called His Dad Will Do, and it comes out on January 10th. So that's the next thing that's coming up before I start writing more paranormal historical romance later in the year.
Well, I'm pretty easy to find online, Gail C. Martin or Morgan Brice. As long as you spell them well and put a .com, you'll find me. I'm also on pretty much all the social media. And again, if you use the names, you'll find me. The next book coming out, I'm in the Valentine's Day at Canham Castle collection, and that one does have fairies in it, so I'm very excited about that. And the Light My Way Home Treasure Trail novella that was in the Yearbook Boyfriend's Boyfriend collection is going to be on Amazon. And then Peacemaker, which is the Wild Wild West male romance, I'm hoping to have out by the end of February. So lots of good stuff coming up, but mostly you can find me here on Continual. So thank you to all of our wonderful, wonderful authors for being here. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more romance coming up on Continual. So we'll see you online.